again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latest gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Fry, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
Just like every other podcast. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Drunk Turkey Show. I'm Daniel, alongside with me, as always, Big Blue. How you doing today, Blue?
Doing good. Trying to stay hydrated, with this heat.
Oh, dude, it's hot out, man.
As you can see, I need some more blue stuff to power me up. But you know what? It needs a little kick.
Oh, dude, it's too early. It's too early. Well, you worked last night, isn't that correct, Blue?
I did work last night.
Now it's see-through. Well, we got a great show for everybody tonight. We have author, journalist Howard Blum. He's written several articles for the Airmail and has a book coming out here in the next few days, week or so, June 25th, When the Night Comes Falling. Howard, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're pleased to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. But
I'm going to stick to coffee, Blue. Okay.
Yeah. It's okay. I normally drink coffee too, but I want to go to bed in a little bit. So
I hope I don't put you to sleep then. All right.
No, you're good. You're good.
So, we'll start off in the beginning. What was your reaction, Howard, to hearing the murders? Idaho, four students murdered, 2 alive, hours within 911 call. What were your first thoughts when you heard about the incident?
I'm a longtime reporter. I've been at the New York Times for a bunch of years, and I went off and did books and investigations. And this was in the early days, and I was fascinated that it was a perplexing case. I mean, no one knew why these 4 students were killed. There was no suspect. There was no murder weapon. There was no trail of blood out of the house. And so I started talking to editors in New York, and I said, I want to go there. I want to try to solve the crime. So they agreed. I get on a plane in the early days, and I very quickly, part of my vanity, figured I've got this crime all figured out. I figured, well, here's the house, and there are some fancy houses around it on the top of the cul-de-sac, and I figured someone must have seen these kids, some repressed guy, and he would have been filled with thoughts about their exuberance, and then at the same time comparing it to the rut that his own life was in. And many of those houses, because there were fancier houses above the King Road house, were owned by this church group. So I started talking to members of the church group, and I spoke to their pastor, Doug Wilson, who's a fascinating guy. He's very articulate, very charismatic, and I disagree with everything he says, but on his views of liberality in the community. But we had an interesting conversation. But then I'm realizing I'm in a closed room. There are no windows. And this is a group which is against COVID vaccinations. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what have I gotten into by trying to solve the case? And then 3 days later, I didn't solve the case, but I got COVID. So that was my initial introduction to Moscow, Idaho. And I was told very early on that it's Moscow to rhyme with Costco rather than like the town in Russia.
Oh, wow. I guess we've been saying it wrong as well this whole time. So you said you arrived there, you spoke with the pastor there. was everybody open to speaking to you early on, or was there a lot of pushback, and has that changed over time?
Well, the one advantage I had is I got there early before there was a suspect. So then everything was very much open. Even the police, the Moscow police would talk to you. There were people at the university who would talk to you. There were lawyers from the families that would talk to you. Some of the families would talk to you. Then came the judicial gag order. And I sincerely believe, not just as for my own self-interest, but that gag order was a mistake because it allowed rumors to fill this vacuum when there is no source of actual news. When reporters from the Idaho Statesman, for example, people like Kevin Fuchsler, who's a great reporter, but the hands were tied, you couldn't get to the bottom of things. And that allowed just rumors and nasty ones often to fill this emptiness. So in the early days, I was able to establish contacts. I mean, one of the things I did before I even went out to Moscow is I looked at the old Moscow Police Department annual report. And they list not just the policemen, they also list auxiliary policemen, and many of them were university professors, not many, but several were university professors. So I had that conduit to people who knew the police, who knew the university community, and also gave the names of their psychologists and clergymen. And I was able to establish some inroads before the bands of the gag order found everything too tight. And that held me up in good stead for the next year and a half as I continued to dig and continued to return to Moscow.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the gag order is something that has allowed for, like, as you mentioned, a lot of the speculation to be fueled, a lot of misinformation that is out there has been somewhat at a root or a cause to this. So you've gone back and forth to Moscow several times for your book. How many sources would you say you have that helped you compile everything that's in it?
One of the things, as we agreed before I went on, the book comes out June 25th, and until it does, I'm sort of bound by some non-disclosure agreements I've signed. I'm going to be on ABC, Nightline, and Good Morning America, and I can't say too much of the specifics. Right. That sounds, very tantalizing. I apologize, but talking to people. When I was at the Times, I had a city editor, Sidney Schamberg, who was a famous Pulitzer Prize winner. The movie The Killing Fields was made about him in Cambodia, and he was sort of a mentor to me. And I remember being stuck on a story in the South Bronx. I had spent several months on it. It was an intricate story involving murders and voodoo and drug trafficking, actually 28 murders. And I couldn't quite get it. And Sidney said, people talk. That's the one rule you have to remember. You keep on pushing, you keep on knocking on doors, and people talk. And so eventually, I did get people to talk, and not just in Moscow, but also in Pennsylvania, which is a real part of the story, and in Washington State, and sort of persistence. And because of the gag order, while I had these original sources, what I tried to do was something the FBI did. They built this case by building a family tree of genetic clusters, investigative genetic genealogy, and they sort of had this tree till the limbs reached out to Bryan Kohberger. Well, I sort of did that in reverse with the help of a researcher. I went through families of people who were close to people involved in the case, and if the actual family members couldn't talk to, I took it for granted that they might have talked to their relatives. And the more I started banging on doors, making phone calls, going to different restaurants and bars with different people, I was able to get family members to talk a great deal. For example, one of the key stories I tell, and the book is sort of structured about this, fascinating cross-country trip that Bryan takes with his father not long after the murders as he returns home. Well, they're sitting in this little Hyundai Elantra. They're, just shoulders apart. There've been 4 murders in that town. Michael Kohberger knows that his son has had problems. You have to believe that they had some sort of discussion of what was going on. And Michael had talked to relatives and people about it, and I was able to get real insight of what went on that trip across America. And the book sort of uses that trip as an anchor to tell the story. In many ways, is like Odysseus is 10-year trip home in the Odyssey. I tell this 4-day trip to go back and forth in time and tell this whole story and have it sort of unravel. So it's a compelling narrative.
Nice.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to. Is that an echo that I'm hearing? I'm looking forward to hearing it. Reading it. I've already pre-ordered, guys. The book is coming out June 25th. I have in the description, linked in there, the link for Amazon so that you can go and pre-order this book. So you yourself didn't speak with Michael Kohberger directly, is that correct?
One of the things I'm not going to do is tell you who I spoke with or who I didn't speak with, because people who did speak to me spoke in confidence because of the gag order. But I will say, and I think readers will see, that I'm able to get inside the minds of many of the characters in this book to make statements they made, and I hope, or the ambition, the literary ambition, is to make them come alive on the page. I want this not just to be an expose, but the subtitle of the book is a requiem for the Idaho student murders, and I want this almost to be like a memorial prayer to give the victims a sense of the memory, what the world has lost with the loss of their lives, and to make all the characters, the parents, the survivors, become real. In many ways, this is a story totally about victims, because in addition to the 4 people, the 4 young students who were murdered, their families are victims. The town of Moscow is a victim. And I think, as you'll see, Bryan Kohberger's family is a victim too in all this. It's a dramatic story, but also a tragic one.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. Oh,
yeah,
man.
I think yours is having an echo.
Mine?
Yeah.
I think so. I apologize, guys. I don't know why. You know what? I'm going to stop sharing. Maybe that'll stop that. So sorry about that. That loud noise kind of interrupted me. Well, going back to when you went there to Moscow initially, you said that police were open with you initially, and then the gag order came in. I was watching one of your other interviews with Megyn Kelly, and it seemed like your opinions about the police work that was done in this case was questionable, or maybe concerning at some points. Was that a sense that you got in the beginning, or is that a sense that it's kind of happened over time? And do you still feel that way?
It's become reinforced over time. What I give you a hint of what I talk about in the book. There was real animosity between the local Moscow task force and the FBI. And they didn't work together as a well-functioning team. That allowed, I think, the suspect to remain at large for longer than he should have. When he officially became a person of interest, Bryan Kohberger, to the FBI, they did not share this immediately with the Moscow Police Department. Also, when the Moscow Police Department, people took time, even in Washington State too, there was the bolo for the white Hyundai Elantra. That was released, I think, on November 25th. I don't think it was till the 29th of November that the Washington State Police, 10 miles away, got around to looking at it. And then when they finally find a car that they identified a Kohberger. Well, what happens to that official report? That's one of the stories that I reveal in the book, and I think it will both astonish and infuriate readers.
Really, really. So, sorry about that. I don't know why this echo is coming through here. In the book, you're going to it's not just Michael or Bryan Kohberger's father that you're kind of going through. It's also the victim's parents as well. Or is there a specific parent that is the focal point?
Well, I do write about Steve Goncalves a bit. I mean, your heart goes out to him, or at least mine does. Here's a man who says, you send your daughter off to college and she comes back to you in an urn. How, as a human being, I'm a father of three, how can you not feel for him? And I also think what he decides to do is damn heroic. He decides, I'm not just going to sit back passively and wait for things to get done. This is my daughter. I'm going to try to do whatever I can to get to the bottom of things. And he does many things. And his facing up to the challenge is one part of the story, and how it turns him. As I've written about, he's one of the major supporters of the Utah bill, of the Idaho bill that was passed, 186, for a firing squad. I mean, he's become a victim of all this. And Michael Kohberger's father, who's, as you'll read, I hope, is refusing, slowly but surely he's following the footsteps where they lead him of what his son might be involved in, and he's just afraid to confront it. It's too overpowering. The idea that your son might be a suspect in a quadruple murder is I guess, has to be any father. And so it's the story of one family and another family and of two fathers and how they deal with this horrible, horrific situation that they've been caught up in.
Oh, yeah, it's a horrible situation, especially losing his daughter at college like the way he did. I was going to ask you, since you've been there a few times since the house has been demolished, have you seen the site?
Yes.
Gone back here?
No, I have seen the site, and the demolishing the house is strange. I understand what the university was trying to do. This was the university's decision. They were trying to exorcise all the ghosts from the past. They think if they tore down the house, all the demons would disappear. And I think that's, fatuous reasoning. Until there is a trial, until everything is explained, there's a guilty or innocent verdict, a motive is put forward, perhaps, is getting rid of the murder house is just something the university is doing, I think, to make sure they're able to continue to have a large enrollment. They don't want prospective students to see this and to be scared away. And I think it was a mistake for them to turn it down. In the early days, before the house was torn down, I went out there on a snowy night and I stood in front of it in the darkness, and it's incredibly quiet. They have a plywood frame erected over the door, and I'm thinking to myself, was that put up to keep people out or to keep the demons that are at large in that house inside so they don't spread out? And I'm thinking there, having these thoughts, and suddenly a light shines on me and I'm trapped in it, startling me, putting an end to my thoughts. And my initial thinking was, well, this is what it must have been to wake up in the middle of the night out of this darkness. And the one, Xana's comment, there's someone here, suddenly be surprised. And the light that trapped me, suddenly a voice called out and said, be careful out there. It's icy and slippery. I don't want you to fall. And there was a security car parked catty corner. It was black. I hadn't seen it, and was able suddenly to flashed a light on me. I thanked him. He was being very polite, and I walked off. But you can see what it must have been in the middle of the night in that house to wake up and to see someone standing over you in black with a mask on and a hunting knife in his hand.
Mm. Yeah, it's that's horrific. I mean, that's something that, like, after this incident had occurred, I always checked my doors when I went to sleep, but afterwards I double check, triple check, especially, the back door, front door, garage, everything, because you just never know. This is a small town, small community, so you wouldn't expect anything like this to happen there. That just kind of tells you that something like this can happen anywhere, and I think that that brings out the fear.
Yeah, no, the fear of that night. People magazine is running an excerpt. I think it appears on the 20th of this month, which details the chapter on the night of the killings. And they thought, many, just to give a hint of what's in it, many people have said that the suspect's white car that came there 3 different times, turns around, all that, was stalking the house. My feeling is that he wasn't so much stalking the house as trying to get up the nerve to cross this mental boundary where he could be a killer. Each time he tries to escape, to drive off, to get away from the demons that are urging him to go into the house. And when he finally comes back and he realizes he can't escape from these demons, he's able to find the strength to turn off the key. It took the strength of Hercules, in effect, to turn off the key on his Hyundai and then take the knife in his hand, walk down that hill, his feet crunching on the ice, till he gets to the kitchen door, which then opens up like an intake of breath. It's the only sound in this very quiet night. And after that, that's when the night comes falling down with a madness all of its own. It's a grisly moment.
And I like the way you say the crunching of the ice, because I lived up north, and when it would get icy, yeah, that's right, you'd be walking home at night and you just hear the crunch underneath your feet.
And that, one of even though there was a gag order, for example, I was able to go there and walk down the hill, and it was difficult going with the crunch of the ice, and I could feel, my feet, my boots on that ground. I had my parka on, my stocking cap pulled down low, and it was pretty cold. And one thinks of, that wasn't too long after the killings. One thinks of the how cold it was on that night. Then one goes to the alibi, which has been just offered up in court, that he was out looking at the stars on a frigid night, just coincidentally between 2:47 and 4:48 in the morning when his phone was turned off and the murders occurred a little after 4. That's a heck of a time to go, uncomfortable time to go out looking at stars in a hilly, isolated park in Washington State.
Yeah, the alibi is, to me, I think it's really, really weak.
And another thing about the alibi, I mean, that I can talk about is, first they gave that alibi about 9 months earlier. They gave it in a terse one sentence. He was out hiking around. The judge, he's like a character in a Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, repeating his name, Judge, like Major in Catch-22. But Judge said, that's not an alibi at all. That's a sort of alibi. So they take 9 more months delaying the legal proceedings moving forward. And they come up with, they add like a sentence more. They name the park where he was walking around in. It's, there's a statement that lawyers use. If you have the facts, pound them. If you don't have the facts, pound the table. And I think that's a bit of what the defense is doing now, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. To me, I think it's more of throwing mud on a wall and seeing what sticks. Did you take the drive that was in the probable cause affidavit?
I took the drive. I spent some time in Washington State University. Most interesting thing I did, and I wrote about this in Airmail, is this pool party that Bryan Kohberger goes to, that he's invited to by people who lived, by someone who lived in the building. I think it's Chris Martinez that he goes to at the housing, sort of student housing project in Moscow. And I spent some time there, talked to the people involved there. As I've written about, Bryan Kohberger is sitting there talking to people, and he hits on two of the women there who were in black two-piece suits, and he gets their numbers. He never calls them, but the women have told me they were getting hang-up calls in the aftermath, and where that's connected, who knows? But it's a sort of a chilling thought that he was looking at these women too, but couldn't quite find the will to take the next step. Because here he was at this pool party, people who were there, and I wrote about this in Airmail, so it's been published already. He's sitting at the edge of the pool, and he's looking good. He's gotten in shape. He's lost over 100 pounds. He has his hair slicked, and he wanted to be a player. He wanted to be one of the other kids there, but because of who he was and who he is, he could not get involved in that sort of world. And I think that was what was perhaps tearing him apart.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't, I must have missed that article where you were writing about him being in the pool.
Well, the pool party is, something the FBI has been going into, as you read in the book, trying to get photographs of who was there, both perhaps the victims, whatever. But very early on, when Bryan first arrives in Washington State, and he's unloading his car with his father. His father went out there originally, and that's sort of interesting. Bryan Kohberger was 28 years old at the time. And his father feels his father, who is 68, feels he has to go traveling with his son because he really doesn't know how his son's going to adjust. And the father convinces a neighbor, Christopher Martinez, who's a former veteran, a very impressive man. Maybe you can introduce my son to some people. And Martinez, because he's a nice man, he tells him about this pool party that some of his friends are giving in Moscow. And that's
I do remember that. I do
Bryan's first trip to Moscow. And I talk about that trip and the party, and I give some details about it that I think readers might be interested in.
Interesting. That is interesting. There's been a lot of talk over the, I guess, year and a half now, about a pool party, some rumors and speculation. So it's interesting to hear that there was more to it. I had heard the story of the pool party. I hadn't heard that he had gotten 2 phone numbers, is what I was trying to say. I didn't know that part. But that's interesting. That's interesting stuff. So when you did that drive that's on the PCA, did you notice anything about the atmosphere? I mean, not the atmosphere, the scenery. Was there a lot out there? What do you think about somebody maybe being out there without their phone on?
It just seems odd to be out there without your phone on. But what I was sort of looking for, where there were places where you could get rid of the murder weapon, where you were, and they sure are. And also, one of the things that I've written about is before the murders, Bryan Kohberger goes to a Walmart and he buys a sort of blue workman suit. And and one theory is that he wore that blue workman suit on the night of the murders. That's why there was no blood anywhere. That's one of the most amazing things about the case, the absence of blood, anything that Bryan Kohberger had in his car, whatever. and a trail of blood outside the house. You would think with so much blood that was literally dripping out of the floorboards of the house. Everyone has seen that photo of the blood dripping out of the side of the house. There's so much it couldn't even be contained in the four walls. There was nothing on Bryan Kohberger. And one theory that the FBI is taking quite seriously, and I write about this in the book, is that this blue workman's suit that he had, they have a receipt for it, and that perhaps he wore that in the house at night, later put it in a plastic garbage bag or whatever, and that was one of the things that he might have gotten rid of on that ride.
Yeah, that's something that we've theorized as well, because, I thought that they were going to find something in that car, given the amount of blood and the scene that you described. I was shocked, but then, I started thinking about, how much effort probably went into this. I mean, the only DNA that we're aware of, or that I'm aware of, is the DNA in the sheath. So whoever committed this crime closely with a knife and didn't leave anything, sweat, eyelash, and eyebrow hair, nothing. I mean, he had bushy eyebrows, not one fell. So if he went to that extent, I think he would have gone to the extent of also planning the exit, the drive away, how he was going to prepare the car. I think the most recently, Rex Huerman's, the Long Island serial killer, his, I guess, laptop came into play, and he talked about, doing the stuff after the crime so that way he can continue to get away with it. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was something like that. In your book, and you mentioned this earlier, there's a lot of rumors that were going on early on. Do you disprove any of those rumors in this book? There's ones about drugs being used and Papa Rogers, stuff like that.
I think I give a detailed description of what actually happened, and in the process, I dispel some of the rumors. What makes the drug angle so fascinating is that it's going to be part of the defense's argument. I think they're going to show how drug could possibly, if you have to create an alternative scenario, you have to tell a different story. They're going to focus on that. The head of the drug task force in the area, Sheriff Brett Myers, said that's the answer that makes sense to him the most, drugs. Also, you have so many of the victims, their families have ties to drug problems. As Ann Taylor, Kohberger's lawyer, knows full well, Xana Kernodle's mother was in jail at the time, and she was going to defend her, Xana Kernodle, from the drug charges. So there is this, all the questions inexorably lead back to drugs. Tying into that is the university life, fraternity row. Well, I interview people in the book who talk about drug dealing on University Row, something that's being confirmed in the book by police authorities. So there is that element. I will also say that of the 4 victims, according to what I've been able to learn from the autopsies, there was no trace of drugs in any of the systems of the 4 victims. None. They had no drug use themselves. So I think that's interesting. I don't want to disparage the victims. One of the things that I think about is Xana Kernodle on her high school graduation before she went to the university. On her mortarboard, she had, "For the lives I will change. For the lives I will change." And that's, in many ways, the most poignant part of this story, the most affecting part, is that these young kids with so much promise will never get the opportunity to live out their lives and to change other lives. And that's just a horrible tragedy.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. Those 4 victims and their families have been impacted like no other. And that's one of the things that, you know, a lot of folks will look at some of the things that, like, for instance, I know, or I'm familiar with Steve and Kaylee Goncalves, and people ask me questions like, hey, well, what did they mean by this or that? And I'm like, well, one, you know, it's a live show sometimes that they're doing. There's emotions and things that are involved in that stuff. You might not want to take everything literal, especially when somebody's speaking out of emotion.
I mean, they definitely get, you know, I would say that too, a sort of free pass. They unfortunately have earned the horrible right to say whatever they want, because they are very much victims of this. And the trajectory, I fear, the rest of their lives is always going to be impacted by this. I mean, I think of Steve Goncalves, you know, staring at the camera when he gave one of the early interviews and telling the killer, "We're coming for you. We're coming for you." And that was just not a warning to the killer. It was a promise to himself that he was not just going to sit back idly. And there's something, to me, heroic, something admirable about a father wanting to avenge his daughter, not letting her go, you know, just gently into the good night, but he wants to make sure that justice is done. And that's another reason why the delay of the trial is so infuriating, because justice is just being delayed. And I think it's being delayed for the most cynical of reasons by the defense.
I definitely agree with you on that one. Yeah, and I'm glad you said that also about the no drugs in the system. That was something that I was also aware of with Maddie and Kaylee. I wasn't aware that that was the same situation with Ethan and Xana. And so, you know, to get that out there that, hey, these folks weren't, you know, involved in that. You know, it wasn't like they were trying to prepare for a drug test, obviously. So, you know, there would be something there had they been, you know, recreationally using these things. There was a party the night before with 150 people at their house, you know, so you would assume that there would still be something like that still in their system.
Right. I mean, again, I want to emphasize, you know, the subtitle of this book, of, you know, When the Night Comes Falling, a requiem. It's a memorial prayer for these students. And I hope I've made these students, these victims, come alive as characters, and the people who don't know them could get a sense of the lives they lived and the lives that they might have had if they hadn't been cut short. I want to be respectful to them and give them the honor that's due.
I've been saying that from the beginning. I've even always wondered if, like, have you read Ethan's mom's book?
I've glanced at it, and you know, the Chapins are a wonderful family, and he was a wonderful sort of happy-go-lucky, goofy guy, very handsome young man. He's sort of, you know, what me worry attitude, moving through life, and you just know he was somehow would have seemed he was able to finesse life forever, and that only good things were going to come sort of accidentally into his ways, sort of like Lucky Ethan, the kid who would dress up in a hot dog outfit, or you know, always jump onto the dance floor and dance in his goofy way. And again, it's a tragedy. When one considers his death, I mean, Ethan was 6'4", he was an athlete, great basketball player, good at other sports too, and yet the assailant was able to kill him. And that what happened the night of the murder, as I said, that's something I go into that People is going to be detailing in their online excerpt. But, you know, it just happened so quickly. And the details, I think, will shock people.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it will. I mean, the police chief put out there that that not just the rookie cops, but even himself and some of the other cops were needing psychiatric help or therapy with the
scene.
Yeah, and
that's, you know, that's one of the things that I spoke about. I think I broke that, you know, months earlier, the whole thing. And when you talked, how was I able to get sources? Well, when I read the police report, like, you know, days after the murders, I saw who was the psychologist for the police. And so when I first went out there, I was able to interview him, and he was able to tell me the story about he plays in a 70s or 80s cover band. They do a lot of Eagles. They do Neil Diamond's Sweet Caroline. And when he first gets the call from the chief, he's leaving his house. He has a long driveway, and the chief is calling, and he thinks the chief is calling to apologize for not coming to his show because they're good buddies. And the chief says, no, it's not about that. He says, I think some of my young officers are going to need your help. And then he pauses and he says, it's not just the young officers. And everyone in the police department became a very personal investigation because so many, they were part of the town. So many, like the chief went to the University of Idaho. His two daughters went there. They all could envision this happening to them, that these were in effect their children, their community. And yet there were mistakes made in the investigation that I document.
Got you. Yeah, I've heard of some of the mistakes as well. And you also documented early on also that when police arrived at the scene, there was students there that were quiet, and one person murmured dead. Does the book go into the 911 call at any? I mean, that's a big mystery to everybody.
I have to admit, I haven't heard the 911 call. What is the larger mystery, and I go into this as best as I can, is the 8 hours between Dylan's citing the intruder, I think twice, and then making this call. And then when she makes the call, she doesn't call 911. She calls friends from the fraternity. They come down, and one of Ethan's buddies eventually makes the 911 call on her phone, on Dylan's phone. And what I've heard of the 911 call is just a wail. It's just, heartbreaking, but I don't think it's of any evidentiary value in a sense. There's no secrets involved.
Gotcha. So it's probably more in effort to protect Bryan Kohberger's fair trial. I think if something got out that was, saddening to that extent and horrific to that manner, I think that it would probably give people a certain, look at Bryan Kohberger a certain way.
I mean, the real bigger question is, why did Dylan do nothing? Why did she, not call 911? What happened after those moments? And that's something I do discuss in the book.
Okay. I have my own thoughts. I myself I'm an ex-police officer, so I've dealt with like victims of like sexual assault, and sometimes they don't report it early. They don't call police. They call friends and stuff. So trauma can be very tricky, and so it is what it is. What do you think?
And I might suggest that trauma might have saved her life. For example, when Xana says there's someone here, if she had not spoken, if Kohberger might have just passed her by. I discuss in the book whom I think was the primary target. And her speaking up, I think, cost Xana her life. I think perhaps Dylan remaining silent saved her life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you. So kind of transitioning to the recent court hearings, what is your opinion on the change of venue? That's the next one that's coming up. Do you think that's a right move by the defense? Me personally, I think it's the wrong move, but what are your thoughts on the change of venue?
I think it's definitely the wrong move, and I write about it. One of the reasons why it's the wrong move is because of the jury pool. The jury pool in Moscow, you're going to have to exclude anyone from the university, most probably. So that leaves the large part is the Christ Church group, the Kirkers, Reverend Wilson's, Pastor Wilson's flock. Pastor Wilson has told me that his group has had many conflicts with the police coming out of the pandemic. His son and grandson have gone on trial. He has said to me on the record that the police lied when they were talking about his parishioners and his son and grandson during the trial. And so since they've lied before, I would counsel my parishioners, he says this, and I go into this in great detail in the book, I would counsel my parishioners not to believe any policemen on the stand. I think they will be very sympathetic to anyone who's opposing the police narrative in Moscow. I think they will get a more favorable jury pool than if they move elsewhere in the state. But I think what the defense is ultimately trying to do by this change of venue is just delay, and more delay. The trial is not going to take place probably at the earliest be a year from now. That's what the judge was talking about, a year from this summer. Well, now it could be 2 years or 3 years from this summer. That's the game. I think they're very happy having their client stay in the Moscow jail rather than being convicted of a capital crime and perhaps having to face a firing squad, which could happen. In the courtroom, Ann Taylor always makes a point of saying that she believes in her client's innocence, and she goes out of her way to put a protective hand around Bryan's shoulder. Her co-counsel, Miss Massouf, has said it's, quote, a privilege to defend Bryan Kohberger. And they make a very convincing case. But I would suggest if they actually believed in their innocence, I knew if I were convicted of a crime and I knew I didn't do it, or if I was standing trial rather for a crime, I'd be shouting it from the rooftops. I'd be demanding to get me out of jail. I'd be demanding to lay out the facts and not wait a year and a half and say I was walking in a park at 4 a.m, looking at the stars on a frigid night. And I'd be urging the authorities to look for the real killer or killers. I'd say, let's get to the bottom of this. So their argument and their conviction and their support of their client, while it's admirable, I don't find it very persuasive.
I've been saying that for a little while, that if he's innocent and he knows he is, why not just start trying to prove it? That way we can find the actual person who did this. But I think him being silent and by him, I guess, wanting to be in jail, to me it shows a different picture.
Well, early on he was like, I can't wait to be exonerated, blah 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 blah. That seems to all have died down over time. And so, I mean, it's probably why, there's been less and less stuff there that, or maybe things that he was banking on didn't really work in his favor. Do you go into, in your book, like Bryan Kohberger's attempts to become an intern police officer and why or he may not have gotten that position?
I go into Bryan Kohberger's attempts and success in reinventing his life. I mean, here he was, 120-pound overweight heroin addict at one point, and going to a dead end sort of student, goes to community college, and you have to admire him to a certain extent. He's able to reinvent his life. He's able to lose the weight. He's able to work out. His body becomes a temple. He becomes a vegan. Then he makes it a fortress because he's learning the martial arts. He's doing all this stuff, and he's able to get into a very selective graduate school for criminal justice. I mean, his future seems really bright. And then things fall apart, and I document sort of the existential crisis he has and how that sends everything awry.
Yeah. I think there's a I think there's a like a little bit of a showing of a history of things that aren't going right for him. Things that we do know is he's not he's getting kicked out as a as the teacher's assistant at WSU. He's having problems with his professor, having problems with PhD students, and at the same time, I suspect he's not getting the job as the intern police officer. So I think his world is kind of crumbling around him. We touched a little bit.
What he talks about that, interestingly enough, and you can read this in the book, with his father on this trip across America, how
Really?
what is happening at WSU to him and how he feels he maybe can right the situation. Because at this point, even though he's been formally fired from asked not to come back or he's not going to get his scholarship and not going to be a teaching assistant. He hasn't received that notification as of yet. He just knows that something is in the works. And he still thinks there is a way out of this. And he believes, or he wants to believe, that he can talk his way out of this, and that when he returns, there will be a hearing where he will be triumphant and he will get reinstated as a teaching assistant.
Interesting. See, that was one of the things that I was always kind of wondering is, did he even tell his father that he was going through the problems that he was going through? We know he changed his license plates from Pennsylvania to Washington. So to me, that's somewhat of an indication of him wanting to go back. And if he's lost his job, what he's going to go back to. So I had thought about that. That's an interesting thing. I can't wait for the book to come out. I want to see so much.
I mean, what he lost is not the job, the teaching assistant job, but it was they gave him the $29,000 a year to pay for it. And when you've got nothing to lose, as Bob Dylan says. His whole life that he had constructed, and it was really something that before that you could admire. Getting off of heroin is no easy trick. It takes a lot of discipline. He moves from one obsession for being a heroin addict to this sort of fitness fanatic, this vegan, and he replaces that with another obsession. He was a man who obsessions come easily, and that's why you can see him also believe in fixing on one of the people involved or living in the house, and I go into that a bit in the book too.
Interesting. What do you think about when it comes to his alibi? What do you think about the fact that he's saying that he was at Wawa Park, which is, I guess there's been some legends that Ted Bundy's first murder, Joyce LePage, her body was found in that location. And when he leaves to go back to Washington, he takes a weird route going through Grand Junction. He's caught in Loma, which is another place where Ted Bundy had committed a murder that he had basically stated that he had committed it right before his death. But that one, the body was never found, and the other one, they never really tied it to him. So one, they're kind of alleged. Any credence to anything like that? I know he studied serial killers in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think what's most interesting about Loma is, and I go into this in some detail, the FBI had lost him. They were trailing him, and they had lost him until he got to Loma. The fact that the FBI was trailing him is an involved story that I think people will be interested in, might make some news. His being in the park, well, he has been seen walking, not at 4 a.m, but at 6 or 7 o'clock at night in other parks in the area. I've spoken to some of the people at the pool party, for example, who came across him there as they were leaving one park. They saw him going in, but it's a specious argument. He just happened to turn off his phone just at that time. I think, and to look for Ted Bundy similarities, I think that might be might be a bridge too far, at least for me at this point.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I think that was just kind of some of the things that people look into. And then again, if somebody commits a crime like this, there's probably going to be some similarities with other people that commit crimes like this.
I mean, you put up, everyone is looking into every angle, and that's one of the problems with this gag order, that it allows people just to go off in any direction. And because the crime has no motive at this point, then you have to believe in anything. You have to investigate anything. That was the problem that the police confronted when they begin their investigation. At the early days of the investigation, they said, nothing makes sense. We have to assume that anything is possible. And I talk about some of the avenues that they go down. It takes them a while to realize that they're dead ends, but they're, interesting avenues. And just as you were saying, they seem feasible and logically possible, but they turn out to be dead ends until they put this all together.
That's very true. That's very true. You're absolutely right on that. So you spoke a little bit earlier about the book turning into a docuseries. Is that correct?
Well, it's going to be a dramatic series. Village Roadshow Productions has bought the book to produce it. And what they're going to do is have the story of this car ride across America. And I'd like to think I make the characters and the victims come alive on the page, while at the same time, it's also a compelling mystery. And I think that's what they're going to try to convey to the screen. It's, sort of exclusive to you. It's just being announced today in the trades, the sale for the Hollywood production. So, that's exciting, and it's sort of fun. I have another one of my books, which The Floor of Heaven is being made by Ron Howard right now into a movie. Oh, wow. So it's sort of gratifying and flattering to have two productions moving forward.
Yeah, Blue's right on that one. That's pretty amazing to have something like that. That's awesome. That is awesome. You got to keep us posted on that. You also mentioned you have some interviews that are coming up. Can you want to share that with everybody?
Yes, I'm going to be on, let me see if I get this correct, on Good Morning America on June 20th, on Nightline June 25th. I think on June 23rd, there's an excerpt in People, and then in the New York Post. So those are, the books should be getting some attention, I hope, and I hope people will, find it a compelling read. The initial reviews have been, the early reviews in the book trades have been very gratifying. You sit in a room trying to write, you're writing on deadline, and you're at the same time you're trying to tell a story. What I tried to do, and I realize this is wildly ambitious, but I tried to create a narrative that would aspire to be something like In Cold Blood or The Executioner's Song, where it just wouldn't be a police procedural, but would tell a suspenseful story about the people, and people, could spend their summers, days reading about this book and become engrossed in it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to the release of it. It's going to be June 25th. It's you can pre-order it on Amazon. In fact, in the description, guys, you can click the little button there. It'll take you to the Amazon page where you can pre-order it. Make sure you get your copy. Are you going to be doing any book signings or anything once it's out?
I will. Some have been set up, but if there are any bookstores out there that would like to have me, contact HarperCollins, and the publicity department, and I'll be glad to go. Have books, we'll travel.
100%. Well, I got one final question for you. You think police got the right guy? It kind of alludes that you think so, but I want to ask you straight up. Do you think that Bryan Kohberger is the right person?
Well, I, without being too cute, I do give the answer in the book. That's one of the things in the book, what I believe. I just will say that I'm sorry the trial is being so delayed, because I think justice is also being delayed.
I agree. Well, you got any final words or questions for Mr. Howard Blum here?
No, I just want to say thank you for coming on. I wish you the best of luck with all the interviews that you're going through. We've been through some interviews and they drug us through the mud, but we're still here. So
There's
Well, I've
two
been through the
sides of
mud
everything.
before too, but thank you. You guys were very kind, and I enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you.
Yes, yes. I intend on reading the book as soon as it comes out. Once it's done, would you come back and talk to us about it?
I'd be flattered if you asked me back. That'd be great.
Yes,
That'd be
sir. Yes,
awesome.
sir. Well, I thank you so much for joining us and answering the questions that we had, the ones that you could. Much success in everything that you have going on forward, and including the book and movies and stuff. And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you. Good talking. Talk to you soon.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you
Yeah,
soon. Bye.
bye. Thank you.
All righty, guys. So that was Howard Blum, author, journalist. He's been to Moscow several times, has interviewed and had many of people in and out of the community referencing this crime. And he has a new book that's going to be coming out. Make sure you go and check it out. I thought this was an amazing interview with Mr. Blum. I think he answered a lot of questions that I had. Maybe even not so much brought up some concerns, but definitely made me think, yeah, well, maybe it's not open shut. But what are your thoughts, Blue?
Yeah, I mean, I still think a lot of evidence is still going to come out during the case. You know, by him saying it's delay is true. They're pushing it back, but that happens everywhere. I mean, I've seen cases here tried years later. So I hope it doesn't. That way, these families get justice sooner than later. But you know, that's what he's writing about, is that he wants justice for the families, and
Yeah.
not just the victims' families, but also the assailants' families, because they also been put through some stuff, accosted. So
Yeah.
and that's just part of life. I see it here happen to both sides of the families when there's issues and something happens here in this state.
Yeah. Yeah. And even his sisters got fired, from their job. So this has affected them financially, 100%, and you can't choose who you're related to or any of those things, or the actions of people who are close to you. So, hey, we got a super sticker in from Natalie James, $9.99. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody that's tuning in, and we see all the thanks and amazing interviews and stuff like that everybody's saying. We appreciate that. Before the show started, me and you were kind of talking back and forth about some of the questions we wanted to answer, and one was the term requiem, which is the memorialization. And so I'm glad he answered that before I could even ask him, like, why choose that word. And I think once we're done reading that, we're going to understand, how it memorializes them.
Yeah. And I don't read books too often, but I will read this one.
Well, I'm going to read this one too, man. The pool party, I found that to be interesting. I think there might be something to that.
Well, I always remember there was an interview. I can't remember what news station, but they were interviewing the neighbor.
Yeah.
And he did mention about Bryan going to the pool party, but I never remember hearing about the phone numbers.
The phone numbers, yeah.
But,
yeah, it's crazy. And Jeff asked, when's the book come out? It's going to be coming out on the 25th of June. So just in a little bit, not too long. Serious Black comes in with a $10 super chat saying, great interview, Turkeys, and thank you to Mr. Blum for joining us today. Yes, 100%.
Thank you.
He did an amazing job. And that was a great interview. I really enjoyed it. And I think once the book is out, and maybe once it's been circulating a little bit, he's probably not going to give away too much even then. You know what I'm saying? He's going to want everybody to read the book. But, once it's out, and he might be able to get into some more details about certain things that, certain feelings or things that aren't in the book. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And all I got to say is to Nightline, you bamboozled me once. Never again. Never again.
And we'll end it with that, guys. You guys have a great day. Thank you guys for tuning in on this special morning interview with Howard Blum. Until next time, we're going to be back tomorrow night, Friday night, at our regular time with a true crime Time. I hope I said that right. True Crime Time. He's also covering the Bryan Kohberger case. We're going to get into that discussion, probably talk a little bit about this, stuff that we talked about today. So until next time, guys, we'll see you later. Peace.